1969 also saw the debut of a significant new contender on the Australian touring car scene. The Canadian-born driver Alan Moffat set up permanent headquarters in Australia, bringing with him a bright red new Mustang.
Alan Moffat's 1969 Boss 302 Trans Am Mustang is without doubt Australia's most famous racing car. It was one of only 7 built by Ford US to topple arch-rival Chevrolet in the 1969 Trans Am series, and with its potent Boss 302 V8 engine, it proved to be a formidable weapon. Through the late 1960s and early 1970s, Moffat raced for 6 consecutive seasons against fellow greats like Jane, Beechey and Gagan, and in that time it amassed an incredible 101 race wins from 151 starts, and at one stage it held the lap record at every track it competed on in Australia. Honestly, just being able to stand next to this legendary muscle car is always a thrill.
The thing cost a fortune. I mean, it was absolutely the most technically correct car that you could get. The radiator, the engine, exhaust system, the brakes, everything was special. And they'd just been built for one purpose. Other race cars it was up against were compromisers. You know, and he had a good budget, and he was up against guys who didn't have that same level. But mind you, they made him work. He didn't run away and hide.
And Mustang driver Alan Moffat has taken the lead. Right on his tail, the defending title holder Ian Gagan, but he's going to need plenty of skill and speed to down Moffat.
Pete Gagan, Norm Beechey and Bob Jane were all seen as being sort of the guys in the white hats. And Alan came in and sort of positioned himself as the guy in the black hat. If you would, if you would, a Western style approach, and his approach was so much more professional in the aspect of what we'd see it today. He really went about his motor racing in a very, very professional fashion. He was there to win races, not just to enjoy himself. And because he was one of the first people to bring in really major sponsorship in Coca-Cola, other than oil company sponsorship, and so he looked at the whole business of motor racing as a business, not as a sporting adjunct to his business. The other chaps had either tyre dealerships in Bob Jane's case or car dealerships in the Gagan's case. These chaps were businessmen outside motor racing, whereas Alan Moffat was a professional motor racing driver.
At the end of the year, I'm very lucky to rub much more than a couple of $1,000s together. But when you, and as you're sitting here, can look around, see that my net worth is certainly not zero. And if it was not for the fact that I could, I suppose, bail myself out with the sale of my equipment, I wouldn't be prepared to put as much into it as I do.
How much do you put into it then?
Well, tens of thousands, how's that?
Moffat was a different kettle of fish. Moffat, to be honest with you, and it was different in the sense that Moffat couldn't like you. He didn't want to talk to you because you had to be the enemy, both personally and on the racetrack, to justify his conduct, I guess, I imagine. And so it's totally different to Gagan and Beechey. Like Moffat claims to have relationships with people on the racetrack that wasn't like that, but I don't think Moffat could race anybody without having a nature of combat.
I think the arrival of Alan Moffat's Trans Am Mustang, the Boss 302 in 1969, it did herald a new era in the class. It was quite interesting because Moffat was originally understood to be chasing one of the 1968 ex-Shelby team cars, and no one would have imagined that he would have been able to get his hands on one of the state-of-the-art 1969 cars that the factory was racing in the Trans Am series that year. But just through contacts, an extraordinary amount of generosity on Ford Motor Company's part, Alan Moffat arrived with this brand new factory-built Trans Am state-of-the-art race car, and it was just like no one had ever seen anything like that before.
There you can see just how slippery the road is at Warwick Farm tonight, and storming through on the inside goes Alan Moffat past Frank Gardner, who made a fairly cautious or either perhaps an over-exuberant start, and there's an incredible start by Alan Moffat, coming away from the inside of the second line to go straight to the lead. How he got around Gardner, I don't know, but look at the lead he's opened up as he goes around Polo Corner for the first time.
It was a very special car. Like, you know, we're in Ford Motor Company then we had a guy called Keith Horner, which was the marketing director. And it's like all these sort of things, Charles, in motorsport or any business, you've got to have sort of someone at the top that wants to do what you want to do. And when it was 67, you had the Bill Burkes of the world, and like we did that 70,000 endurance thing around the Yangs with XM Falcons. It was all Harry and Bill Burke. Bill Burke was a petrol head. Then when Bill Burke went, Keith Horner was the marketing director, and he wanted to go motor racing. Well, they used to say, like, race on Sunday, sell on Monday, sort of was the thing. And he was a passionate. And I was sat in a board meeting one day with Moffat and I at a Ford Motor Company, and Horner was conducting this board meeting and had all divisions in there, and he was looking for, we wanted more money. And I remember him saying, he said, well, okay, guys, one was from some department, some other department. You have to all contribute to how much you're going to put into the racing budget. And they're all going, oh, well, Keith, we don't really know what it's worth. And he said, well, okay, this is what you're going to do. You're going to put in X amount, you're putting in X amount, and it went for the whole, and it blew me away. He said no one was going to give any money out of their budget, so he told them that's what they're going to do. So you just need those sort of people. You need those sort of people in the company to do things. And he was very supportive of Alan because he was their man. He was their man. And that Mustang he had was built in America, and Ford paid the bill for it. They paid for that car. That was built by Carcraft, I think, in America. She was a special car, that car. She was a special car. She was probably to the line of being a bit illegal, but on the a lot of grey areas, because they knew our regulations, and that's what the Yanks did pretty well. They built those sorts of cars. It was a brilliant car.
So Moffat around Creek Corner once again. Gagan still in second place.
First of all, the car looked brilliant. It was just different to the other cars. I mean, you had Gagan in white cars, Bob Jane generally in orange cars, Norm Beachy generally in blue cars, so Moffat come along in a red car. I mean, you had the full set. And when they were all on the grid together, it just looked wonderful. And it brought an entirely different dimension to the way touring cars were both raced in Australia and perceived by the Australian motorsport public.
Alan had a truck, everyone had a trailer before, he had a truck, he had good team people, they had clothing, they looked the part, it was marketed properly. It was just the start of a new era. And I learned a lot in that, which I followed on later on when I took over team managing this, and you just got to do things for your sponsor. And Alan was great at doing things for his sponsor. And Coca-Cola was his sponsor, and he did things for them. And that car, well, it was dominant, wasn't it, really? You know, but it was a very special car. And also, too, it was one of those sort of cars, Charles, that didn't need a lot of tuning. It was so good, so competitive, until later on in its life, then when it started to struggle because others were catching up. But it was so good. Alan had an easy life with that car when he first raced that.
Moffat now well and truly held up behind Doug MacArthur in the Falcon V8. Gagan had to butt right off to avoid running into the back of Moffat, as a matter of fact, for an instant there. And you can see the level at which this race is now being run. Braking is very heavy indeed on what's a solid road. Acceleration is being wound out to the maximum consistent with the adhesion, which is about 0.1. Both drivers, I would imagine, are going to finish this race wet through and not from rain. Over the crossing, the order is Alan Moffat in the Trans Am Mustang, Ian Gagan, the Falcon GTHO in second place, Frank Gardner, the Chef Camaro third, car 6, Bob Stevens in the Trans Am Mustang in car 6 is fourth, and fifth place being held down by Brian Thompson in the Tirana. That's the way they should finish at the end of this first heat. Moffat takes the flag, Gagan second, and Frank Gardner will be third.
It lifted everyone's game because it arrived here and it just lifted everyone's game to the point where the Gagans and those people had to go better, because that became the benchmark. And that car became the best touring car in the country. And the Gagans had to lift, and the Beaches and all those guys had to lift their game, and they did.
But as soon as they hit the first stretch of straight, Moffat boosts his Mustang into the lead, and away he goes. He's got rain tyres aboard, and while the track's wet, he's getting plenty of traction, while his dry-tyred rivals are in trouble. But if that rain goes, the tables will be turned, and he'll be in difficulty.
The car was a visual sensation and was immediately successful. However, Moffat's first outing in a championship race in the red Mustang resulted in a DNF. Over the next 6 seasons, the hard-headed, uncompromising Canadian steered the car to victory in 2 out of every 3 races he contested. Some of those battles stand out as some of the greatest racing in Australian motorsport history, especially in one Easter race at Bathurst, where Moffat was just pipped by Gagan's Super Falcon.
It was Bathurst when Pete was up against Moffat, and Moffat had given him some curry early on, and Pete was finding it difficult to counteract this. So he said the next time we got to the braking area, I don't know if it was up at the cutting or off Mountain Straight, approaching the right-hander off Mountain Straight. In fact, I think it was up towards the cutting. And Moffat's lifted off, and Pete's nestled in behind him. He's just pushing him up the braking area. He said he behaved himself after that. And then they got on with the racing. And he said, you could see Moffat looking, oh! And they were side by side over the hump, and the cars were getting sucked together because they got airborne and everything. And Moffat got, of course, some oil on the windscreen from Pete's car and things. But that was the good thing. I don't live with, everything was wonderful in the old days, but there were aspects of it that were definitely better. The cars looked more spectacular. They moved around more. Aerodynamics had less effect. The tyres let them move around more. And so they could be much closer together. So overtaking was much easier. And that's what we saw in that race, just cut and thrust all the way, and so close to each other all the time. Nowadays, we have what I call, it's like a dog's picnic. It's dog sniffing motor racing, everybody checking everybody's rear end, and I like to see some passing.
That, to me, was the defining moment in the history of that car. The Easter Australian Touring Car Championship round at Mount Panorama. 13 laps the distance, 50 miles or about 80 kilometres, and it just became a two-man war. I mean, there was a big field of cars there, but the whole race was about Alan Moffat in the Boss 302 Trans Am Mustang and Pete Gagan in his XY Super Falcon. Those two just ran away from the rest of the field. It was the most intense battle that anyone had ever seen. And even today, people look back on that as the greatest touring car race of all time. I mean, just think about what was achieved during that race. Moffat set a new lap record, a 2:22.4, I think it was, which was something like 9 seconds faster than he'd been around there in the same car only 2 years before. And it was something like 16 seconds faster than the quickest lap he did in the Phase 3 GDHO at the Hardy Ferrado 500 the previous year. So these guys were just taking it to another level. I mean, this was really, really, really intense racing.
And the margin at the end?
It was only 0.6 of a second. You could have thrown a blanket over the two of them. But just think about what Moffat was doing in this. This is when I became a Moffat fan forever, because the man's intensity, his need to win, some would say resolute, I would say in this case suicidal. He was so hell-bent on winning that race. Pete Gagan's car was pumping out a little bit of oil, and he started to get a bit of oil on the windscreen of his car. So as a natural reaction, he turned the windscreen wipers on. But all the wipers did was smear that oil right across the screen, so he couldn't see a thing. First thing he did was try and stick his head out the driver's window to see where he was going. That was no good. Unbuckle the seat belts so he can stick his head out the side. That was still no good. Ultimately, he actually got out of his seat and put his left buttock cheek up on the seat and was driving like this, without a belt on, 173 mile an hour down Conrod Straight, trying to beat Gagan. Now, if that isn't a racing driver, I don't know what is.
Ahead of the race, turning it once again to fairly familiar Moffat-style precision. He's got a fairly useful lead at this stage. We've had 4 seconds over in the bright yellow and very sideways Falcon.
Moffat's Trans Am Mustang had an incredible racing career between 1969 and 1974 when it was finally retired.
Still the same order as Peters again, but Moffat making a move on Gagan, and he's going through. Now Moffat, but he'll need to go pretty fast to catch the Holden. It's going like a rocket.
In 2/3 of the races it started, it was victorious, winning 101 times from 151 starts. It held qualifying and lap records at tracks all around the country. That, combined with the rivalry between the top drivers, ensured touring car racing became a huge draw card with a near fanatical following. It was a promoter's dream.